They are watching you right now. I know you cannot see it. I know that when you look out through the forward viewport at the dark between those two stars, the one marked Dalasa Minor on your chart, the other unnamed because no Keth cartographer has been willing to name it for 300 years, all you see is ordinary void, empty space, the kind of deep nothing you have crossed a dozen times in training runs and patrol rotations, and it holds no particular dread for you yet. That is because you are new. I am not new. My name is Vareth 7, Fleet Second of the Keth Dominion, attached to this watchpost for 31 years. I have delivered this briefing 11 times. I will deliver it once more now for your rotation, because that is the rule, and the rule exists because of what happened here 3 centuries ago, and because of what has not happened since. When I am finished, you will understand why the rule holds. Whether you believe me is, in the end, irrelevant. The rule does not require your belief. It requires only your compliance, so sit down, turn off the external audio feed. Not because anything is transmitting on it, because the silence that comes through that feed when you are stationed at Dalasa is a specific kind of silence, and new officers who leave it open find that it begins to occupy a room the way a living thing would, and I have found it is better to meet that silence when you have some ground under you. Turn it off. Good now. Let me tell you about the expedition. 312 years ago, the Keth Dominion was a different kind of empire. I do not mean that as criticism of our ancestors. I mean it as the most precise statement I can make. We were younger. We had been expanding for 600 years across 14 recognized sectors, and in all that time, we had encountered 6 species capable of spaceflight, and had absorbed or neutralized every one of them inside a generation. We had encountered no equal. We had certainly encountered nothing our military apparatus could not reduce to a negotiated surrender inside of a standard campaign year. We were, by every metric our own historians had assembled, the foremost military force in the explored galaxy, and we believed this the way you believe in the temperature of a room. Without thought, without examination, the way you believe in any fact that has never once been contradicted. The Forbidden Reach had been on our charts for roughly 40 years at that point, not our designation that came later. At the time it was logged in the cartographic registry as Sector Null Veth, a broad wedge of space beyond the Dalasa corridor, approximately 11 light-years deep, containing one G-type star, orbited by 8 planetary bodies, the third of which showed the electromagnetic signatures of a biosphere. Primitive, our analysts said, possibly pre-industrial. The signatures were unmistakably biological: oxygen atmosphere, liquid water, electromagnetic activity consistent with a civilization not yet capable of interstellar travel. Our first survey probe had returned the data without incident. Our second had not returned at all. Our third had not returned. Fourth had been sent with a recovery function and a stronger hull rating, and it had not returned either. This was, at the time, classified as an instrumentation anomaly. Survey probes fail, equipment fails, the sector was distant. Perhaps there was a gravitational anomaly in the corridor. Perhaps solar radiation from that G-type star was stronger than the initial spectral analysis had suggested. Our engineers redesigned the 5th probe with full radiation shielding. It did not return. That was when the Admiralty began to pay a different kind of attention. Understand the context. In 600 years of expansion, we had never encountered a biosphere that stopped our probes. We had never encountered a pre-industrial civilization that demonstrated any awareness of our survey activity at all, much less the capacity to intercept and eliminate a hardened survey probe at range. The Admiralty's first working theory was not that we had found something dangerous. Their first working theory was that our probe designs had a shared flaw, and that the conditions in Sector Null Veth were exposing it. They commissioned a 6th probe, a 7th, an 8th. None of them returned. The 9th was sent with a live crew of 3, a minimal observation team, no armaments, nothing a territorial species would read as a threat. Their last transmission was received at the Dal Asa relay station 4 hours after they entered the sector. It was a navigational status update. Team, the kind you send when everything is operating normally and there is nothing to report. After that, nothing. 9 probes. 1 crewed vessel. Gone. The Admiralty stopped calling it an instrumentation anomaly After the crewed vessel did not come back, they formed a special study committee, ran for 3 years, and produced a report. I have read this report. It is careful and thorough, and it arrives, through 40 pages of measured analysis, at a conclusion that the committee could not quite bring itself to state plainly. What it states instead, in the summary language of bureaucratic caution, is this: the evidence is consistent with the presence of a technological civilization in Sector Null, VETH, that is operating at a level of capability not anticipated by initial survey data, and that a recalibration of threat assessment parameters is recommended before further incursion. What it means is, something in there destroyed everything we sent, and we do not know what. That report was filed, and the Admiralty read it, and then they did something that, with the distance of 3 centuries, I find genuinely difficult to understand. They approved the expedition, the Dalasa expedition, 40 warships of the Dominion's Third Fleet, commanded by Fleet Prime Orithven, the most decorated military commander in Keth history at the time, an escort of 6 logistics vessels, a survey contingent of 32 scientific personnel embedded in the flagship, full armament, every ship carrying the complete standard weapons load of a campaign fleet. 4 months of provisions. The stated mission objective, as logged in the official Admiralty dispatch, was to establish contact with and assess the military capacity of the species inhabiting Sector Null, VETH, and if necessary to demonstrate Keth capability in a manner sufficient to negotiate a satisfactory boundary agreement. 40 warships. Ben himself. The Dominion had never sent a force that size to an initial contact operation. It had never needed to. They left Keth Prime on the 42nd day of the 3rd cycle, 312 years ago. I can tell you this precisely because their departure was recorded in every public archive in the Dominion. It was considered a matter of national pride. Orithven gave a speech from the steps of Fleet Command that was broadcast on every relay channel. He said they were going to do what the probes could not. He said the Dominion did not send machines where it could send warriors. He said the matter of Sector Null VETH would be resolved before the year's end. He was right about that last part. The matter was resolved, just not in the manner he described. The fleet entered Dalasa corridor on the 61st day of transit, or is the natural approach route to the sector, a relatively clear lane of space between the gravitational influences of 2 adjacent star systems, roughly 4 light hours of travel from the sector boundary to the outermost range of that G-type star's influence. A standard corridor transit for a fleet that size, at their drive output, would take approximately 9 standard hours. The last official signal received from the fleet was transmitted 3 hours and 47 minutes into that transit. It was a routine navigation relay, position confirmed, drive systems nominal, no anomalies reported. After that, the Keth Dominion did not hear from Fleet Prime Orithven, or his flagship, or any of the other 39 warships, or the 6 logistics vessels, 32 scientific personnel, or anyone else aboard that fleet ever again. Not one signal, not one escape pod, not one distress beacon, not one hull fragment recovered in a subsequent search. 47 ships carrying tens of thousands of Keth personnel entered that corridor, and the corridor gave nothing back. Nothing. I want you to understand what I mean when I say the word nothing in this context. I do not mean a battle was fought, and the fleet was destroyed, and the wreckage was not recovered. I mean that the instruments at the Dalasa relay station, which were specifically calibrated to detect any energetic event, weapon discharge, explosion, catastrophic hull failure, in the corridor and the sector beyond, detected nothing. No battle was fought. No ships exploded. The fleet entered the corridor, and the corridor was simply empty afterward. The relay station heard no screaming. No last transmissions in the official channels. No emergency protocols. The fleet became, in the most literal possible sense of that word, nothing. Nothing. C7 vessels, in the space of 6 hours, as if they had never existed. The instruments at the relay station, and I want to dwell on this, because this detail is in the classified record and not the official one, and I think it matters. The instruments did not register the absence as Silas Sunce. They registered it as a specific kind of signal termination. There is a technical term for this in our sensor engineering, a coherent null. It is not the same as losing contact with a vessel that has moved out of range. It is not the same as a vessel going dark. A coherent null is when every active signal from a vessel or a group of vessels ceases simultaneously. All channels, all frequencies, all drive emissions, all passive thermal output, at the same instant, not sequentially the way things fail, at the same instant, as if a single event touched all of them at once. The instruments are designed to log this distinction because it can indicate specific types of electromagnetic events, certain rare stellar phenomena, certain weapons discharges of sufficient scale. The relay station's instruments logged a coherent null at 4 hours and 9 minutes into the fleet's corridor transit. One moment, Phase 7 ships. The next moment, nothing, not destroyed, erased. This is what I mean when I tell you the rule is not optional. The official Keth Dominion records classify the Dal Osa expedition as lost due to unknown navigational hazard. That classification was adopted in the 6th year after the fleet's disappearance, after 3 years of official search operations, all of which were conducted at the edge of the corridor, and none of which penetrated more than a quarter light hour into the sector, and none of which found anything, and all of which returned. Which I note, because I want you to understand that the rule we now maintain was set at a very specific distance, and that distance was arrived at through experience. You may go to the edge of the corridor. The rule is that you do not enter it. What I am about to tell you is not in the official record. It is in the briefing document passed from Fleet Second to Fleet Second at this watch post, updated, with each new piece of information as it became available, sealed at the command level for reasons I expect you will find obvious by the time I am done. The 3 following things are what I know beyond the official record, and I will tell you all of them. Because if you are going to stand watch at Dal Osa for the next 2 years, you need to know what it is you are standing watch over. First thing is the transmissions. There were 3 of them, not the routine navigation relay I mentioned. 3 additional transmissions, received by the Dal Osa relay station after that one, in the hours before the fleet's disappearance. They were received on a low-power secondary channel, not the primary fleet relay frequency, which is why they were not in the initial post-loss report. They were found 9 years later by an archivist reviewing old relay logs, preserved in the station's secondary buffer as unclassified background traffic. They were flagged, sent to Keth Prime, reviewed by the Admiralty, and immediately placed under sealed classification. I am one of perhaps 60 living Keth officers who have read them. I am going to read them to you now. The first transmission was received 4 hours and 22 minutes into the fleet's corridor transit, 35 minutes after the last routine relay. It was sent by Senior Navigator Vethalan of the flagship. It is 22 words long. It reads, Visual on uncharted installation, bearing 047, at the edge of the stellar habitation zone. Surith Ven construction request. Guidance. We are altering course to observe. I want to stop there for a moment because if you are not familiar with the Surath Ven, you need to understand what that name means before we continue. The Surath Ven are the oldest known spacefaring civilization in the galaxy. When I say oldest, I mean that their recorded spaceflight history, what fragments of it we have been able to assemble from the monuments and repositories they left behind before they withdrew from galactic contact, predates the Keth Dominion's first forged metal by 60,000 years. 60,000 years. They were old when our ancestors were discovering fire. Their technology, in the period when they were still active, and active is a relative term, because the Surith Ven moved through history at a pace that makes our concept of activity nearly meaningless, was, and I am using the most conservative assessment available to our scientists, approximately 8,000 years ahead of our current best capability. They are not a species you would mistake for primitive. They are not a species whose constructions appear in places by accident. They do not build where there is nothing worth marking. And Navigator Vethalan, 4 hours into the Dal Osa corridor, was looking at a Surith Ven installation at the edge of the human star's habitation zone. Whatever the Surith Ven had built there, they had built it long before the Keth Dominion knew this sector existed. They had built it before our cartographers put the first mark on the chart, and they had placed it, specifically, at the edge of the light of that particular star, around that particular world, and had apparently seen fit, in 60,000 years of galactic presence, to leave it there. The fleet altered course to observe it. The second transmission came 9 minutes later. It was also from Navigator Vetholan. It was 11 words. It reads, "There are more of them. Bearing 091 also, and 143, standing by." The relay station's reception log shows a 14-minute gap after that. Then the third transmission. The third transmission is not from Navigator Vetholan. I do not know who sent the third transmission. Fleet's second log for this watchpost, which I inherited from my predecessor, who inherited it from his going back 11 iterations, contains no identification of the sender. The transmission was received on the flagship's primary channel. Whether it was sent deliberately, whether it was a partial emergency broadcast that was cut off before identification could be provided, whether it was an automated distress signal that activated on its own, we do not know. What we know is what it contains. Third transmission is 41 seconds of audio. The first 7 seconds are ambient shipboard sound. You can hear the ventilation system, distant alarm tone. What may be voices shouting in a corridor, though the words are not distinguishable. Then the alarm tone stops. The voices stop. There are 3 seconds of a sound I cannot identify and have never been able to identify, which my predecessor described as similar to the resonant frequency of a very large metal structure under extreme stress, though he noted it could be something else entirely. And then, for the remaining 31 seconds of the transmission, there is a voice. The voice is not speaking in any Keth dialect. It is not speaking in any language our linguists have identified as belonging to any known spacefaring civilization. It is not speaking in any language our xenolinguistics team, which worked on this recording for 11 years, has been able to place within any documented language family. It is a single phrase repeated, calm, unhurried. The same phrase, over and over, 31 seconds. In a voice that I will tell you now carries a quality that is difficult to describe with precision and which I have heard different people describe differently, but which I would characterize as patient. Not threatening, not urgent, patient in the way that a stone formation is patient. In the way that something very old and very settled, in its sense of itself, is patient. The way you are patient when the outcome is not in question, and then the transmission ends, and the corridor was empty, and 47 ships were gone. I have played this recording for every rotation that has come through this watch post for 31 years. I will play it for you now. Listen carefully. Stop. That is it. All 41 seconds. I will not play it again today. The recording is in the secure file I will transfer to your command terminal at the end of this briefing, and you may listen to it as many times as you choose. Most officers who have served at Dalasa listen to it many times. I am told it becomes, over the months, less something you analyze, and more something you simply live with, the way you live with any fact that does not resolve itself by thinking about it harder. The linguists call the phrase repeated in those 31 seconds the Dalasa address, for want of a better name. In 11 years of work, the most they were able to establish with confidence is that the phrase structure suggests a declarative sentence rather than a question or command. Reads, insofar as it reads as anything as a statement, a thing being said, not a thing being asked or ordered. They could not identify the language. They could not locate the phrase in any database of recorded communication from any species, known or extinct. They noted in their final report one additional observation which was filed as a methodological footnote, and which I have always thought should have been the title of the report. The vocal qualities of the speaker are not consistent with any known Keth physiological analog, nor with any known alien physiological analog in our xenobiological database, and we cannot rule out that the speaker is not, or was not at the time of transmission biological. They could not rule it out. I do not tell you this to frighten you. Fear is not a useful response at this watchpost. What I tell you because you need to understand what the rule is protecting, and why it holds, and why it has held for 300 years, through 6 changes of Keth Admiralty, 2 internal political convulsions in the Dominion, through periods when spudjet pressures led to proposals to scale back the watchpost or abandon the corridor entirely. It has never been abandoned. It has never been scaled back. Every Admiralty, regardless of political composition, regardless of budget pressure, has maintained Dalasa at full watch strength. They have done this because of what I am about to tell you, is the second thing I know beyond the official record. The second thing is the Surath Ven. We did not know, before the expedition's disappearance, that there were Surath Ven installations at the edge of that star's habitation zone. We knew the Surath Ven existed. We knew they were ancient. We had found their remnant constructions in 8 other sectors across the explored galaxy, massive structures, always uninhabited by the time we found them, always bearing signs of extreme age, always built from materials our engineers still cannot fully characterize. We found them where old civilizations had risen and fallen. We found them near stellar anomalies. We found them occasionally near the remnants of extinction-level events. We had always assumed the Surath Ven built their installations as markers, records, memorials, observatories, the way you mark a grave, or a place of significance. We did not know what the installations near Sector Null Veth marked until after the expedition was gone and we sent a very careful, very limited, very slow observation mission to the edge of the corridor to look at them from maximum safe distance with long range optics. There are 9 of them. 9 Surath Ven installations, positioned at intervals around the stellar habitation zone of that G-type star, at a distance of approximately 1 light hour from the star itself. They form, if you plot them on a chart, a ring. A deliberate, precisely spaced ring of 9 ancient structures, encircling a single star and the world in the 3rd orbit, at a distance that our scientists characterize as the outer boundary of stable habitation. The edge of the zone where life, as we understand it, can persist. The ring is not complete in the sense of being a solid barrier. It is 9 points of reference, 9 markers. Our xenoarchaeologists studied the observation data for years. The structures are between 80 and 90,000 years old, built, that is, before the Surath Ven entered their recorded withdrawal period, in the era when they were still actively present in galactic space. The surface materials of the structures bear no text in any language, Surath Ven or otherwise. They bear no inscriptions at all in the usual sense. They bear, on every surface of every structure is a pattern. The same pattern, repeated, which our xenoarchaeologists, after careful analysis, identified as a mathematical structure encoding a very simple relationship between a set of quantities. The relationship, reduced to plain language, is this: a boundary, and the consequence of crossing it, not instructions, not a warning in words, a mathematical statement, the kind of statement that can be read by any species capable of building machines capable of reaching those structures, regardless of what language they speak, regardless of their cultural context. The Surath Ven were not making an appeal to your understanding. They were not asking. They were recording a fact. The way you record a physical constant, the way you write down a law of nature. Not because you are enforcing it, but because it is true, and the universe will enforce it whether you have read the record or not. I do not know what the Surath Ven saw at that star, in the period before their withdrawal. I do not know what event, or what sequence of events, caused them to spend the resources required to construct 9 installations of that scale, and leave them at precise intervals around that specific piece of the sky. I know that they did. I know that the installations have been there for between 80 and 90,000 years, and are still structurally intact and still broadcasting. Yes, broadcasting, a low-power signal on a frequency we cannot decode, but which has been continuously active for the entire period of our observation. And I know that when Surath Ven's fleet saw one of them, and altered course to observe it, they did not come back. I do not think this is a coincidence. I want to tell you something else about those installations, something the official xenoarchaeology report mentions only in a subordinate clause, and which I have always thought deserved more weight. The structures are not identical. 8 of them are constructed from the same material and in the same configuration, roughly trapezoidal, 3 to 4 times the height of a standard Keth warship, made from a dense dark alloy that our engineers believe contains elements we have not cataloged. These 8 are old, 80 to 90,000 years. The 9th is different. The 9th is made from a different material. It is larger, approximately twice the size of the others, and it is not 80 to 90,000 years old. Our dating puts it at 40 to 50,000 years old. Younger by half, it was added later, by something. The Surath Ven were in full withdrawal by 40,000 years ago. They have not been recorded as building anything in the explored galaxy in that frame. The ninth installation was not built by the Surath Ven. I have sat with this fact for many years. Our xenoarchaeologists sat with it too, in their report, and they concluded, carefully, with many qualifications, that it is possible the ninth installation was built by a species not previously encountered. It is also possible, they noted, that it was built by a species previously encountered, but not previously known to build things of this kind. They noted, in a final paragraph that I have memorized, that the ninth installation is also still broadcasting on the same frequency as the other 8, and that its signal is not identical to theirs, but is harmonically related to theirs, in the way that two instruments playing different notes in the same chord are related. They are part of the same composition, the 8th and the 9th structures, even though they were built 30 to 40,000 years apart, even though they were not built by the same hand. Someone coordinated them. I do not know who. I do not know when that coordination was arranged. I know that the chord is still playing, has been playing since before our species climbed out of the water, and that it is pointed at a single star, and that in 300 years of observation we have never once seen a ship or a signal or any object whatsoever leave that star's system and come toward us. They do not need to come toward us. They do not need to reach out. The chord plays. The corridor marks where the chord begins. We stand at the edge of the music. The third thing I know is this. Every spacefaring species old enough to have records going back more than 2,000 years has in those records a version of the same prohibition, not the same words, not the same framing, different species, different languages, different histories, but the same prohibition. Do not approach the yellow star in the sector your charts mark as null or void or blank or empty. Do not approach it. The reasons given vary. Some records say the approach is dangerous, some say it is forbidden, some say it is sacred. Some use a word that has no Keth equivalent but which xenolinguists have translated provisionally as already settled, as in, that place is already settled, and not by anything that came after you. Do not approach it. The Surath Ven ring, by our dating, has been in place for 80 to 90,000 years. The oldest known spacefaring civilization in the galaxy is the Surath Ven. The second oldest, the Vale Marith, whose remnants we discovered a century ago, have records going back approximately 52,000 years. Their records include a navigational notation for the sector we designate Null Veth. The notation is a single glyph, used consistently across the Vale Marith navigational corpus, which appears in front of stellar coordinates throughout their archive in other instances where a star system is being marked as uninhabitable due to extreme physical conditions, stellar instability, lethal radiation environment, catastrophic gravitational hazard. The same glyph in front of those coordinates. That glyph. The Vale Marith called it what they called a dying star, a star in the process of catastrophic failure. Our instruments show a G-type star with a stable spectral signature and an expected remaining main sequence lifespan of approximately 5 billion years. Whatever the Vale Marith were marking with that glyph 50,000 years ago, it was not stellar instability in any astrophysical sense our science recognizes. I have thought about this for many years, and I want to share a possibility that the official xenolinguistics team also raised, and then filed quietly in a methodological appendix, perhaps because they were not sure their superiors would find it comfortable. The Vale Marith glyph for a dying star, the glyph that appears across their corpus, in front of coordinates where a star system has become uninhabitable due to stellar catastrophe, is not simply the glyph for death or the glyph for danger. It is a compound notation. Our xenolinguists believe it contains, embedded in its structure, a temporal qualifier. Not dying now, not dying soon, something more like, this star has already reached its end state, and the end state is permanent. And the end state is not the extinguishing kind. The end state is the burning kind, the kind that does not go out, and does not diminish, and does not cool, and does not sleep. The Vale Marith 50,000 years ago looked at that G-type star burning quietly 5 billion years from its natural end, and they used the glyph for a star that has already completed its transformation into something that only burns. I do not know what they saw. I know that the Veil Marath, in their full recorded history across 52,000 years of spaceflight, went everywhere. Everywhere. They are one of only 2 species we have found evidence of whose navigational archive covers the majority of the explored galaxy. And their archives show them approaching and mapping and cataloging hundreds of inhabited systems, including several that had species capable of resisting approach. They went everywhere. They did not go there. In 52,000 years, there is not a single Veil Marath survey entry for Sector Null Veth, beyond the glyph, the coordinates, and the word for a star that has become permanently, irreversibly, the burning kind. There is a third species I want to tell you about, not as old as the Surith Ven or the Veil Marath. A species called the Orith Sen, contemporary with our own early expansion period, roughly equivalent to us in technological level, who maintained territories in the sectors, adjacent to the approach corridor for several centuries, before their records fall silent. In the Orith Sen archive, which was recovered from a derelict station in the 6th sector, and has been studied by our xenolinguistics teams for decades, there are 11 references to what they called, in their language, the closed place. The closed place appears in their records first as an astronomical notation, then as a navigational warning, then as something more, something the word navigational does not quite cover. The last 6 references are in their historical archive rather than their navigational corpus. The last of those references is from approximately 140 years before the Orith Sen. Records end entirely, and it notes. I am reading from the Xenolinguistics translation here, that the Orith Sen Council of Passage voted unanimously to reclassify the closed place from a navigational restriction to a permanent cultural prohibition, that the sector boundary markers were to be maintained in perpetuity by the Passage Council itself, that any vessel found approaching within the designated outer boundary was to be turned back by force if necessary, and that the reason for this reclassification was, in the translation's rendering, that what lives in the closed place does not leave it, and we believe this is a condition it has chosen, and we further believe it has chosen it for reasons that have nothing to do with us, and we intend to give it no reason to reconsider. What lives in the closed place does not leave it. The Orith Sen built boundary markers. They maintained them by force. They reclassified the prohibition as permanent cultural law, and then, 140 years later, their records end, and their civilization ends, and their stations go derelict, and we find them centuries later and read these words, and stand at this watchpost and maintain the rule, which is the same rule the Orith Sen maintained, which is the same rule the Veil Marath maintained in their own way, is the same rule the Surith Ven. Encoded in mathematical notation on 9 ancient structures at the edge of the light of a star they found, significant enough to mark 60,000 years before any of us existed. I am not going to speculate on what ended the Orith Sen. I do not know. Their archive ends mid-cycle, not dramatically, not with a record of catastrophe, just entries, 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 and then none. The derelict station was found structurally intact. Their equipment had run out of power, not been destroyed. Whether the Orith Sen ended for reasons related to the closed place or for entirely separate reasons that had nothing to do with it, I genuinely do not know. I include them in this briefing not as evidence of what the closed place will do, but as evidence of how old this particular knowledge is. And how many species have arrived at the same conclusion from different directions, different histories and different instruments and different languages, and have all converged on the same response. They turned around, they drew the boundary, they kept it. We are the latest iteration of a very old practice. I want to tell you, now, about the incident 60 years ago at this watchpost, because it is the closest thing in our own recent record to a personal testimony. Personal testimony has a weight that archive entries do not. A patrol vessel under the command of a young fleet officer named Soveth Kell departed this watchpost on what postlog describes as a voluntary observation mission to the corridor boundary. He did not have authorization. His stated reason in the message he left before departing was that he believed the accumulated evidence warranted a closer-range observation of the Surith-Ven installations, and that his vessel's passive observation array was capable of recording useful data from the inner boundary of the corridor without crossing into the sector. He was correct that he had the best passive array available to this post at that time. He was wrong about what he would observe. His vessel returned 14 hours later, with Sovath Kel aboard, alive and physically uninjured, and when the recovery team boarded, they found him seated at his command station, with the observation array running and the communications system powered down. He had, at some point in the 14 hours, manually powered down every broadcasting system on the ship. Every one of them. The array had been recording continuously, and the recovery team pulled the records. And the records were later reviewed by the Admiralty's Technical Committee, and the results of that review are sealed at a classification level I am not authorized to access. What I can tell you is what my predecessor, who was at this watch post at the time and was a junior officer in the recovery team, told me when this posting. He told me that when the recovery team boarded, Sovath Kel was sitting exactly as described. Command station, array running, communications dark. He was oriented toward the viewport, which looked out toward the corridor. His eyes were open. He was breathing normally. He did not react when the recovery team entered the bridge. He did not react when they spoke to him. He sat in the posture of someone watching something, and there was nothing to watch, because the viewport showed nothing but ordinary void. Predecessor said the recovery team gave him water, which he drank. They gave him a nutrition packet, which he ate. He performed these actions automatically, without looking at them, without reorienting himself from whatever he was watching that was not there. He sat like that for several more hours, while they brought the vessel back to the watch post. And then, when they arrived, and the docking sequence engaged, and the mechanical sound of the docking clamps came through the hull, Sovath Kel turned away from the viewport for the first time. He looked at the recovery team members around him. He was quiet for a long moment, and then he said precisely, "Tell them the prohibition stands." And then he did not speak again for the rest of that rotation, and at the end of the rotation requested transfer to a ground assignment, and was transferred, and is, or was the last time this file was updated, though he would be very old now, living in a coastal settlement on Keth's 4th provincial continent and, as far as anyone who has looked into it can determine, has not spoken about Dalasa since the day he said those 5 words to the recovery team. Tell them the prohibition stands. I have passed this information to every rotation that has come through this post because I think it is the most useful summary anyone has produced of the situation at Dalasa Corridor. It was produced by a man who went closer than any other officer has gone since the expedition, saw something from the edge of the corridor, in 14 hours with the best passive array this post had available, and who chose, the rest of his life, to express everything he had seen and understood in 5 words. I respect that choice. I have never pushed to access the sealed records of what his array recorded, because I am not certain it would change anything I do, and I am not certain the knowing would be worth the cost of the knowing. Tell them the prohibition stands. This is what you are here to tell them. There is one more thing I want to say before I close this briefing, and I want to say it not as a fleet second delivering standing orders, but as someone who has spent 31 years at this particular position, and who would like to give you the thing I was not given when I arrived, is a frame for why this is bearable. When I came to Dalasa, I came as most of you come, competent, trained, quietly skeptical of the mythology that had accumulated around this posting. I had heard the stories. I had been told about the expedition. I thought, a navigational disaster, a fleet lost to an uncharted hazard, a tragedy inflated by distance and time into legend. Thought the watch was important because it kept untrained vessels from stumbling into an area with an unknown hazard profile, and that the mythology was a useful tool for maintaining the watch, and that whatever was in that sector was probably explicable and probably, given time and better instruments, explainable. I do not think that now. What I think now is harder to hold, but it is honest, and I would rather give you the honest version. What I think now is that the corridor is not marked by myth, it is marked by history. Real history. Older than the Keith Dominion. Older than the Vale Marath records. Old enough that the Surathven found it worth their while to build 9 permanent structures around it 60,000 years before you were born. Real history that the expedition encountered and did not survive. Real history that Soveth Kell drove to the edge of and turned back from without speaking about for the rest of his life. Real history that comes through the secondary audio feed as a silence that has weight. The bearable part, the thing I want to give you, is this: the rule holds. 300 years. Every ship that has respected the rule at Dalasa has come home. The prohibited zone is not expanding. Whatever is in that sector has, for 300 years, stayed in that sector. The corridor is the corridor. Beyond it, particular darkness does its particular business. And on this side of it, we stand watch, and we report, and we maintain the prohibition, and we come home. That is enough. That has always been enough. What this posting is, at its core, is simple. You are not here to understand it. You are not here to solve it. You are not here to prove that the mythology is wrong, or to gather enough data to explain the coherent null, or to identify the language of the Dalasa address. Bright officers have tried all of these things, over 3 centuries, and the record of what they produced is in the secure file I will give you, and you may read it. And what you will find is that the brightest minds the Dominion has applied to this question have assembled an extraordinary amount of detail around the shape of a silence, and the silence has not diminished. You are here to stand between the rest of the Dominion and a line in the sky that was drawn before our species climbed out of the water, drawn by the oldest builders we have ever found evidence of, and maintained, in effect if not in intention, by whatever it is they marked. You maintain your watch parameters. You intercept vessels that approach. You deliver the prohibition notice. You log. You report. You stand your rotation and you come home. You are here to tell them the prohibition stands. That is the briefing. I will transfer the secure file to your command terminals now. File contains the 3 transmissions from the Dalasa expedition, the complete xenoarchaeology report on the Surathven ring, the full Vale Marath navigational corpus entry with translation notes, the Orath Sen archive references with context, the multi-species prohibition survey, and the Soveth Kell recovery debrief, including my predecessor's personal notes. It also contains the standing watch parameters and the contact protocols for species interception. Read all of it. Read it slowly. Give yourself time with the recording. Your first watch rotation begins at the next station cycle. Between now and then, if you have questions, sure, I will answer the ones I can answer. I have noticed that officers who have just received this briefing sometimes do not ask questions. Sometimes they sit quietly for a while, with the particular expression of someone who has been given a fact that does not sit easily in the space where they keep their other facts. I understand this. I had this experience myself 31 years ago, in a room not unlike this one, with a fleet second who had my job before I had it, and whose file is in the archive under this one, whose notes I have read and reread more times than I can count. He was a thorough officer. He did good work at Dalasa. He maintained the prohibition. He came home eventually on a medical transfer. He never came back. Most of us do not come back in the end. Not because of anything that crosses the corridor. Nothing has crossed the corridor in 300 years, and I believe nothing will. But because this posting does something to the part of you that requires certainty, not a damage, a recalibration, you leave here knowing that the universe contains, at a specific set of coordinates, something that the Galactic oldest builders found significant enough to mark before your species existed, and that your Dominion sent 47 ships into, and that a man named Soveth Kell drove to the edge of, and turned back from without speaking about, for the rest of his life. And you carry that knowledge out into whatever you do next, and it sits in the back of your mind like a secondary audio feed you cannot fully power down. I am told this fades. I would not know. I do not believe I will serve another full rotation at Dalasa. My health has been declining for some time, and the medical officers at Keth Prime have recommended I transfer to lighter duty at the end of this cycle. I will likely do this. I will train my replacement as my predecessor trained me. I will pass the file. I will recommend that the new fleet seconds listen to the recording more than once, and give it time. and not make the mistake I made in my first year of trying to place the language. You cannot place the language. We have been trying for 3 centuries. It is not in any database. It is not a dialect. It is not a corrupted signal. It is a voice, making a statement, in a language that does not belong to any species we have catalogued. Aboard a flagship whose entire crew is gone, transmitted from the center of a corridor, where the galaxy's oldest builders chose to construct their ring of 9 around a single star and a single world. The 9th installation that was not built by the Surith Ven. The chord that still plays between the 8 and the 9th. Marth glyph for a star that has already reached its permanent end state. The Oreth sends 5 words. What lives in the closed place does not leave it, and we believe this is a condition it has chosen. I have spent 31 years with all of this. I have listened to the recording. I do not have an exact count, but the number is high. I have listened to it in the early hours when the watch post is quiet, and the secondary feed is running, and the dark between the stars outside viewport has that particular quality. I have listened to it on the days when this posting felt routine, when the maintenance cycles and the log-ug updates and the interception protocols made this feel like any ordinary assignment at any ordinary border. On those days especially, I listened to it, to remember what the routine is protecting. And I will tell you what I told my predecessor I would tell the rotation after me, which is the one thing I believe with more certainty now than I believed it when I arrived. Whatever that voice is, it knew we were listening. It knew in the way that something knows, not when it calculates but when it simply is aware. The way the star is aware of the light it throws. The way the Surith Ven monuments are aware of what passes near them, not by mechanism, but by nature. The voice made its statement, and the corridor emptied, and the statement was transmitted. And it was received by us, and it has been in our files for 300 years. And whatever is on the other side of Dalosa corridor has not, in all that time, sent another word. It said what it had to say. The room is quiet now. I see you sitting with it. That is appropriate. Take the time you need. The secondary audio feed is still off. You can leave it off until you are ready. When you are ready, you will turn it on, and you will hear the silence, and you will begin to understand what you are listening for, and why, and you will stand your watch, and you will come home. We stand watch, prohibition stands, that is all. Wait, one of you has a question. I can see it. Ask it. Yes. You want to know whether any species in all the records we have assembled from the multi-species survey ever went in and came back. You want to know if there is a single case of a species crossing the corridor, or the equivalent boundary wherever they encountered the prohibition, and returning to report what they found. It is a reasonable question. It is the question I had when I arrived. The answer is no, with one exception, and the exception is not as reassuring as it sounds. The Theva Orin were a spacefaring species occupying territories in the sectors adjacent to what is now designated the Outer Approach Zone, roughly 2,000 light-years from Dal Asa, in the period approximately 800 years ago. They were, by the records that survive, a careful and methodical civilization, not prone to the kind of imperial expansionism that characterized the Keth Dominion in Oreth Ven's era. They mapped slowly. They studied what they mapped before they approached. Their archive is one of the most thorough we have recovered from any contemporary era species. And in that archive, spanning 400 years of recorded spaceflight, there is a section dedicated entirely to what the Theva Orin called the Approach Zone. Their designation for a broad region of space that our own cartographers would recognize as the outer boundary zone of the human territories. Their records of the approach zone are detailed, cautious, and methodical. They note the prohibition in their own terms. They note the evidence for it in their own terms. They note the ruins of other species who did not observe it, apparently were visible from the outer boundary of their approach routes. And they make, over a period of roughly 60 years, a sustained argument within their own archival record, a kind of internal institutional debate, conducted across multiple decades, about whether the prohibition is real, or whether it is a cultural artifact built on incomplete evidence, or whether the correct response to an uncharted danger is to approach it with full preparation and precision, rather than to avoid it by convention. The debate as recorded is exactly the debate you would expect from a rifle and civilization. It considers the evidence carefully. It distinguishes between what is known and what is inferred. It takes seriously the alternative explanations. And at the end of 60 years of this debate, the Theva Orin Passage Authority approved a single mission. One ship, unmanned, loaded with the best passive observation equipment they had, programmed to enter the approach zone, conduct a fixed-duration observation pass of no more than 72 standard hours, and return automatically. The ship went in. The ship came back. The Theva Orin recovered the observation data. They reviewed it. Their archive has entries from the review period. Careful, methodical entries, in the voices of the scientists who reviewed the data. Noting that the review is ongoing, noting that analysis will require significant time, those entries continue for approximately 14 months, and then they stop. Not the archive continues in other subject areas, another 100 years. But the section on the approach zone stops. The debate stops. There are no further entries on the subject. Summary of findings, no published analysis, no policy update, no formal renewal or revocation of the prohibition. The section simply ends, mid-analysis, 14 months after the ship came back with its data, and the Theva Orin Passage Authority, in the subsequent 100 years of their recorded history, never again sent anything toward the approach zone. No probes, no observation missions, no vessels of any kind. The approach zone disappears from their navigational updates entirely. Not marked as forbidden, not marked as anything, simply absent, as if the cartographers stopped seeing it as a place on the map that required notation. They did not mark it. They did not warn against it. They did not close the file formally. They just stopped looking at it, and stopped looking in that direction, and went on with the remaining century of their civilization's recorded history doing other things. Then, their records end for reasons that appear entirely unrelated to the approach zone, and we find their archive, and read these entries, and do not know what the observation ship recorded in 72 hours inside the approach zone, because the analysis was never completed, or was completed and not recorded, or was completed and destroyed, and we do not know which. One ship went in. One ship came back. The people who looked at what the ship recorded stopped looking at it. The section ends. This is the closest thing we have, in the full multi-species survey, to a species that went in and came back. I do not find it reassuring. I suspect you will not find it reassuring, either, now that I have told you about it. There is one detail from the Theva Orin archive that I will add, because it has stayed with me since I first read it, and I think it belongs in this briefing. At the very end of the approach zone section, the last entry, which was made 14 months after the observation ship returned, which is the last time the subject appears in the archive, there is a single line. Not a policy entry, not a scientific notation, personal entry, in a voice that the xenolinguists believe, from context and linguistic register, belongs to the senior analyst who led the data review. It is dated on the final day of what appears to have been the review period. It reads, translation, "We saw what it is, we will not be writing that down. We saw what it is, we will not be writing that down. I have no further information about this. The entry is the last entry. The section ends. The archive continues in other areas. Theva Orin lived for another 100 years and did not look in that direction again." There is something I want to say about the star itself, before I close, because everything I have told you has been about what others recorded, and what the expedition encountered, and what the Surath Ven built. And I want to give you one thing that is mine, one observation from 31 years at this watch post that is not in any official record, because it is not the kind of thing you can file in a record without sounding like a man whose long posting has affected his judgment. In the forward viewport of this watch post, on a clear instrument day, you can see the star. Not well. It is a point of light indistinguishable from any other star at this distance, unless you know where to look, and I know where to look. I have been looking at it for 31 years. There is an instrument package on the watch post's external array, one of the original survey instruments, now largely obsolete, still running because no one has bothered to decommission it, that takes continuous spectral readings of the nearby stellar environment and logs them in a standard format. I check these logs as part of my routine every few months. I do not check them for any specific reason. I check them the way you check any instrument that is running, to confirm that it is still running and still reading. The star's spectral signature has been stable in our records for 300 years. G-type, main sequence, unremarkable. The Vale-Marith glyph notwithstanding, our instruments see a stable, ordinary star. What I noticed 12 years ago is this: the spectral signature is stable, but it is not constant. It varies. Within the stable G-type range, there are periodic fluctuations in the emission spectrum, subtle enough that they do not trigger any of the alert thresholds in the instrument. Package, small enough that they read in the logs as routine solar variants. I would not have noticed them if I had not been reading the logs obsessively for 2 decades. When I did notice them, I had our technical staff run an analysis on the variance pattern, framed as a routine calibration check, so that I would not have to explain why I was interested. They ran the analysis, they found the variance pattern. They characterized it as routine solar variance, as expected, and closed the calibration log. But I know what routine solar variance looks like. I have been reading these logs for 31 years. Routine solar variance is random within the normal range. It does not have a pattern. What I found in those spectral logs has a pattern. Not a simple one. Not one I can characterize with the mathematical vocabulary available to me. But a pattern. The way the Surith Ven installation markings have a pattern. The way the chord between the 8th and 9th structures has a pattern. Something organized. Something that repeats with variation the way a language repeats with variation. Not the same unit each time, but related units. Units that reference each other. Units that together form something larger than any individual unit is on its own. I do not know what I am reading in those logs. I am not a spectral analyst. A fleet second who has been at a border watch post for 31 years and has been watching a star that the galaxy's oldest builders found. Worth marking, and in 12 years of quiet attention to a spectral log that no one else reads, I have come to believe that the star is not just burning, that it is doing something else as well, something our instruments were not designed to look for. Something that falls below the threshold of what we call a signal and above the threshold of what we call noise. In the particular gap between those two categories that you only find when you have been looking at the same thing for a very long time. The Vale-Marith called it a star that had already reached its end state, the permanent burning kind. I have spent 12 years looking at what I believe is that end state, and what I believe is this. The burning is not indiscriminate. Burning knows what it is burning. It always has. That is the last thing I will say about it. I told you earlier that I will not be here for another full rotation. I want to say one thing more about that, and then we are truly done. I have been at this watch post for 31 years. I came here young and skeptical, and I am leaving old and certain. And what I am certain of is not the kind of certainty that brings comfort, but it is the kind that brings clarity. Clarity is what you need at Dalasa. The rule is clear. The evidence behind the rule is clear. The history of what happens when the rule is not observed is clear. What is not clear, and what I have spent 31 years not resolving, and what I will leave this posting still not having resolved, is the nature of the thing the rule protects against. Not the humans. I have come, over 31 years, to think of the humans as the least of it, or at least as the most visible part of something I cannot fully frame. What I will leave uncertain about is what exactly the Surith Ven saw 60,000 years ago that was worth 9 structures, and 60,000 years of unceasing broadcast. What the Vale-Marith saw that warranted the glyph for already complete and already burning. What the Theva Oran's senior analyst saw in 72 hours of observation data that they chose, in their final professional act, not to write down. I will leave this uncertainty in the file, as every fleet second before me left their uncertainty in the file, because the file is the right place for it, and because the next officer who stands at this post will have their own 30-year encounter with it, and may see something I did not see, and I would rather give them an honest record than a tidy one. Your rotation begins at the next cycle. The file is being transferred now. Stand your watch, come home, that is all.